Hey, good afternoon, grade 8 U.S. history learners in Mr. Drake's class. I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for coming to week 3 screencast in our time of distance learning. I hope everyone at home is healthy and happy and safe. And I miss you guys, and I'm glad you're here. And again, this is part 1 of a 3-part lesson each week. First part, screencast. Second part, activity. Third part, Zoom lesson classroom. Thanks for tuning in to our Week 3 U.S. History Distance Learning screencast. And so let's go ahead and get started. First, let's look at our topic from last week. Thanks for completing the Week 2 lesson activity titled American West Louisiana Purchase. And one more time, our weekly lesson activities can be found in the course weekly lesson folders on Schoology. So if you haven't completed week 1 or week 2 activities, go ahead and make sure you do that now. The grading window, we've got about another week for grades. And so make sure that at least try to get everything in. I will be lenient in grading because, it's a challenging time for a lot of you at home. So I will be happy if you can at least make some sort of effort to get the work in. And each activity has a support piece, which is the easiest part. Then it has an independent piece, and it also has an enrichment piece. And we'll get to that at the end of this screencast. All right, moving on. So let's begin our look at our Week 3 unit topic, which is the Lewis and Clark expedition, which was walking across an unknown continent. So you guys remember that last week we looked at the Louisiana Purchase. Actually, before we get to the Louisiana Purchase, here's our screencast topic starter question. So as we watch the screencast, ask yourself if you can answer this. And then when we meet in our Zoom classroom on Friday, hopefully you guys can share your answer. Also, when you do the activity, this question will be on the activity. So this is kind of a guiding question for our screencast. So when we meet, let's see how we do on it. So how did exploration help the U.S. government make decisions about the West? So we're about to learn about exploration of the West. And the question is, well, how did this exploration enable the U.S. government to make decisions about growth and expansion west? All right, so let's go ahead and begin our topic, which is the Lewis and Clark expedition. Let's start with a review of what we learned. What we learned last week. Okay, so last week we learned that the USA made a land purchase with France, and that gave us this area called the Louisiana Territory. If you remember from last week, they called it the greatest land deal in history. And I said that, yeah, it was a great land deal, probably the greatest in U.S. history. So once the Louisiana Purchase was complete and this land became part of the Louisiana Territory, the U.S. government began planning an expedition through this territory all the way to the Pacific. So now that the U.S. extended all the way here to the Rocky Mountains, they wanted to explore through the Louisiana Territory all the way to the Pacific Ocean, which is down here, but it also extends up here. And that is the story of the Lewis and Clark expedition. The story of the first major exploration through our new chunk of land called the Louisiana Territory, and also into what was then British and Spanish land all the way to the Pacific. And why was that exploration necessary? Well, before we get to the reasons behind the expedition, let's go ahead and look at who Lewis and Clark were. So Thomas Jefferson, you guys remember Thomas Jefferson, he was the one that bought the Louisiana Purchase. He chose 2 army captains named Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to lead an expedition called the Corps of Discovery across the North American continent. So these are the 2 gentlemen here, Lewis and Clark. Okay, hi, I'm back. So we just learned who Lewis and Clark were. So these 2 gentlemen, Lewis and Clark, were picked to explore the West through the Louisiana Purchase and to the Pacific. So here, and they were sent by Thomas Jefferson. So here is the expedition goals. Lewis and Clark were given 3 orders by President Jefferson, which were to make peaceful contact with the Native Americans, find an unbroken waterway across the continent, and record important geographic data along the way. So make contact with natives, find out if there's an unbroken waterway that they can travel across the entire continent on, and then bring back data on the land, animals, and plants of the West. All right, moving on. All right, so how were Lewis and Clark going to do this? Well, if they're looking for an unbroken water route across the continent, they are going to have to use boats. And so the plan was to travel along the river in river boats all the way across the continent to the Pacific Ocean, which meant that they would have to pull the boats when they were going upriver, and they would paddle them when going downriver. Now, if you can imagine, if you've seen rivers, going upriver is the only way to do it is to pull the boat by hand up the river. If you're going down the river, you can go with the current, much easier. That's how most of you imagine river travel to be, going down. However, imagine back in 1804, and they have these, what is essentially are rowboats, huge rowboats, and they have to pull these boats upriver. They're trying to find the top of the Missouri River, so they had to pull the boats if they were going up, and they could paddle them when they were going down. So very difficult stuff. All right, so in 1804, 1 year after the mission was given approval, the expedition started by going up the Missouri River as far as it would take them, and they had to drag the boats against the current, which was, again, backbreaking and very difficult work. So they started here in St. Louis, okay, which is down here at the end of the Missouri River, where it goes into the Mississippi River. And they were going to take this river all the way up. And again, remember, they're pulling the boats upriver. You can't, because this is going against the current, all the way up, and they were going to take it as far as it went. Now, their hope was it might have gone all the way to the Pacific. So if you can see, this area in yellow right here is this area down here. And the Missouri cuts up here, but it doesn't quite get to the Pacific because it hits a series of geographic features, and these geographic features that mark the end of the Missouri River, actually the beginning, are the Rocky Mountains. So all the snowfall and the melting snow, they form the Missouri River, and they flow to the east all the way down to the Mississippi. However, they do not flow down the west side of the Mississippi. So this is the end, or the beginning. This is the beginning of the Missouri, and this is the end. So they're starting at the end, and they're walking up to the beginning. All right? Along the way, they met a Native American girl named Sacagawea. Remember, one of their goals was to make contact with the natives. And when the expedition stopped for the winter at a Mandan Native American river village along the Missouri, they invited Sacagawea, a young Shoshone girl, and her French husband to join the group. Now, why did they want Sacagawea along? Well, Sacagawea speaks many native languages, especially Shoshone, and her husband, the French trapper, he also spoke many Native American languages. So if their goal was to make contact, it would be good to have the Frenchman and his Shoshone wife along, and she became, her name was Sacagawea. All right, so as they moved up the Missouri, you remember the Missouri begins in the Rocky Mountains, and remember, they're in riverboats, so they get to the Rocky Mountains, and of course, they've got to figure out a way to get over them. The Rocky Mountains, the largest in North America, were a major obstacle for the expedition, and they knew they would need horses to get over them, but they didn't know where to get horses. So this is one of the crazy parts of the Lewis and Clark expedition, one of the almost unbelievable parts of the expedition. As Lewis and Clark approached, and their expedition party approached the Rocky Mountains, they ran into a group of Shoshone Indians at the Rocky Mountains, and their leader turned out to be Sacagawea's long-lost brother. Sacagawea had been kidnapped and forced to live with the Native American tribe that Lewis and Clark had met and whom she was living with. But that was not her original tribe. In fact, those people had kidnapped Sacagawea, and she was a little girl. And when Lewis and Clark came along, Sacagawea joined their journey, and they went back to the Rocky Mountains. Sacagawea actually ran into her long-lost brother, and the long-lost brother gave Lewis and Clark horses to get over the mountains. So, pretty crazy story of how Sacagawea met her long-lost brother, and the long-lost brother actually helped Lewis and Clark get over the mountains. All right. Once they were over the Rocky Mountains, they looked for a river that would take them. They looked for a river that would take them down the other side of the Rocky Mountains, and so this river was called the Columbia. Okay, so if you imagine a mountain range and there's snow on top that melts, it can either go down one side or the other. The Missouri went down the east side, the Columbia went down the west side. So when they got over the Rockies, they realized there was not an unbroken waterway to the Pacific. The Missouri actually ended. But they discovered another long river called the Columbia they hoped would take them to the Pacific Ocean. All right, now, so they rebuilt their boats and they got on the Columbia and they started to paddle down the Columbia. Just as winter was coming, in December of 1805, the expedition got to the end of the Columbia River and they saw for the first time the glorious Pacific Ocean, marking the end of their westward journey. So they made it. They made it all the way up the Missouri, over the Rocky Mountains, down the Columbia, all the way to the Pacific. All right. Now, after spending the winter at the edge of the Pacific Ocean, they wintered in what is today Oregon. They turned around and they started back east. So once they had gotten there, and it was not an easy journey, very difficult. There's much more details that you'll learn about when you do the activity and you do the reading that are contained in the screencast. I'm kind of giving you an overview here. But once they completed their very difficult journey to the Pacific, they were rewarded with the chance to do it again by turning around and walking all the way back. So very, very challenging, very dangerous journey that they did. It was remarkable that they were able to complete it. So after spending the winter at the edge of the Pacific, they turned around and started back east, arriving in St. Louis in September of 1806, marking the end of their 8,000-mile, 2-year, 4-month journey. So quite the journey of Lewis and Clark. So was their mission accomplished? Well, yeah. When Captain Lewis reported to President Jefferson and said these words, quote, "In obedience to our orders, we have penetrated the continent of North America to the Pacific Ocean," he knew the expedition had been a success. What did the expedition achieve? Well, remember Thomas Jefferson had said, we want to make contact with the natives, we want to find a water route to the Pacific, and we want to learn about the geography, the plants, and the animals. So let's see what happened. By mapping a route to the Pacific, making friendship with the Indians, and gaining valuable geographic data, the Lewis and Clark expedition did help shape the history of the American West. So it was very successful. All right. So that's the end of our screencast for now. We're going to move on to our American West 3 topic, which is Lewis and Clark, which we just covered. When you do the activity, you will find a starter question that we started with that I want you to answer. And then you'll do a topic text reading that covers our topic. You'll do text-based support questions which cover our topic. You'll have an independent question where you'll have to use additional research to answer that. And then you'll have an enrichment question where you'll have to use additional research to answer that. This enrichment question, you will use the race-style writing format to answer. Okay, instructions for each of the parts are listed on the activity, which is in Schoology. Okay, thank you for watching. Stay safe and see you next week. So remember, one more time, the progression is screencast part 1, activity part 2, Zoom lesson part 3 on Friday. For those of you that haven't visited the Zoom lesson, please do so. It's really nice to hear from everybody and to hear your voices and to see your faces. If you haven't checked in, there are a handful of you that haven't checked in. You haven't emailed us. You haven't visited Schoology. You haven't visited a Zoomcast. And it's really important. Dana Middle School's administration, Dana Middle School teachers, Mr. Cortez, Mr. Bartleson, Ms. Gallego, and myself, we all want to hear from you. So make sure that you at least check in at least once a week. Okay. That'd be really helpful. For those of you that are checking in and completing the activities and emailing when you can, if you have a question, and coming to the Zoom class is fantastic. Keep doing it. We'd love to see you, and it really makes us feel like school is continuing in a really strong way. So if one more time, if you have questions, email me Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday from 1 to 2 o'clock. I will answer any question immediately. Check Schoology for the activity, and then click into our Zoom class on Friday. 7th graders, or actually you guys are 8th graders, so it'll be 1 to 2 p.m. on Friday. All right, guys, take care. See you soon.